Number 10. Green anaconda. The green anaconda is currently the largest snake in the entire world. The anaconda is able to reach a preposterous length of over 40 feet with a diameter of up to 12 inches. That means the girth of an anaconda can be thicker than a size 12 shoe. Another interesting fact about anacondas is that the female is typically much larger than the male. Green anacondas are normally a dark olive color with black spots. They also have their eyes and noses on top of their heads, which helps them to breathe and see while slithering through the water. Considering how massive these serpents are, they spend most of their time swimming in the rivers and lakes of South America rather than slithering across dry land. It's easier for them to move their giant bodies underwater. Of course, if you're wandering around in the jungles of South America, you probably already know not to go waltzing into a river or lake without checking first. There are all types of mysterious predators that lurk below the surface, and you could find yourself getting dragged down by a terrifying snake. Unlike a lot of snakes, anacondas are not venomous. Instead, they use their raw power to strangulate their prey. They suffocate deer, jaguars, crocodiles, capybaras, and even the occasional human. And then, once they suffocate their prey, they swallow them whole. The biggest anacondas on Earth can weigh up to 550 pounds. Number 9. The big snake. A recent report came in from Indonesia, claiming that villagers had captured a python almost 50 feet long and nearly 1,000 pounds in weight. That's bigger than any snake scientists have ever seen alive today. The story was picked up by news agencies all over the world, and photos have been circulating online. Unfortunately, the claim was false, though. According to Snopes, the claims were greatly exaggerated. The snake was actually somewhere between 21 and 23 feet when the Guardian sent one of their reporters out to confirm the beast's length. It was also only 220 pounds. That's well within the normal range for a giant python, not something that represents a new extra-large species of the snake. Still, it was one massive serpent. Pythons are the longest snakes in the world, though not as heavy as anacondas. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, the longest snake ever found was a whopping 32.75 feet in length. It was also a python, and it also came from Indonesia, though it was back in 1912. Since then, a snake over 30 feet has been incredibly rare to come by. Imagining a snake 50 feet in length at this point is pure fiction, as the enormous serpent would have nowhere on our crowded planet to hide. Even prehistoric snakes hardly reached lengths like that. There were snakes larger than anything we have today back in the distant past, but those days are long gone. A snake that size would be something caused by genetic engineering or mutation caused by powerful radiation, some sort of Hulk snake. Number 8. The deadly cobra. Cobras are some of the biggest and most dangerous snakes in the entire world. While they can't compete with boas or pythons, they're still enormous, growing up to 13 feet in length. The biggest of all the cobras is the king cobra, and it's the longest venomous snake still alive on our planet. It has venom so toxic that it can kill a grown man in a handful of minutes. And believe it or not, sometimes these snakes go missing from local zoos and pet owners. Back in 2019, the western German town of Herne was put on high alert, with locals told to keep their windows and doors shut and not to venture out into the long grass after a deadly monocled cobra snuck out of its owner's house and went missing. 4 buildings were evacuated and 30 residents were barred from going home until the cobra was found. It had somehow escaped from its cage and gotten out of the apartment where it had been living in a collection of over 20 other snakes. The monocled cobra isn't quite as large as the king cobra, but its bite is still deadly enough to kill. So have you ever seen a cobra or a python or any other massive snake in the wild? What was it? What happened? Did you get bitten? Tell me about it in the comments section below. And then remember to subscribe to World List if you haven't already for more amazing videos. Number 7. Medusa. Medusa is the world's largest living snake in captivity, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. The snake was measured in 2011 and found to be 24 feet and 2 inches long, weighing 350 pounds. Medusa is a reticulated python who lives in Kansas City at Full Moon Productions, where the slithering beast is the star of their Hell Haunted House exhibit, the granddaddy of all haunted houses in the United States. Medusa was born on October 13, 2004. She eats rabbits, hogs, and the occasional deer, and if she sees a rat, she'll gobble that up for a snack. What's really crazy about Medusa is that she purrs like a cat. When one of her handlers is rubbing her scales, the same way you would pet your cat, Medusa makes a low vibration with her body just like a purr. She sounds like she wouldn't hurt a fly, but she would, although she looks like she prefers small mammals to eating bugs. Snakes are still wild animals who need to eat other animals to survive. Medusa has her own pool that she enjoys swimming in. She likes cuddling and being rubbed. Plus, she even hangs out with the other local snakes living in the haunted house. Medusa is by far one of the most spoiled giant snakes in the world. Number 6. The Florida Python. Python hunters in Florida recently captured a record-setting snake at Big Cypress National Park, measuring a whopping 18 feet in length. According to Orlando Weekly, this was the second largest Burmese python ever captured in the state of Florida. It was found by a pair working for the Python Action Team. Out of the 900 invasive Burmese pythons the team have captured in Florida, this was the absolute biggest. Burmese pythons are targeted as a species that needs to be removed from Florida as quickly as possible. Why? Well, the reason may surprise you. For those who don't know, Burmese pythons have decimated the wildlife in Florida over the past almost 3 decades. They grow to be enormous and they eat everything in sight. They have no natural predators and they breed like the world depends on it. If you want to see huge pythons, then just take a quick trip to Florida. Number 5. Giant English snake. A giant snake was found in England, a place where giant snakes definitely don't live naturally. Police were alerted to an enormous 14-foot python slithering alongside a rural road and arrived at the scene to investigate. They were able to get the snake to a local vet, but unfortunately it died because of the freezing British temperatures. Pythons are huge and powerful, but they're not designed to live in colder conditions. According to Beverly Naismith of the Abbey Veterinary Group, the snake had absolutely no chance of surviving in the sub-zero temperatures. But what's really weird is that nobody knows where the huge snake came from. These kinds of massive serpents are usually found in places like Florida or the Philippines, not in England. It was probably someone's pet that either snuck out of its cage or was purposely released. But even after police launched an investigation, nobody could identify the owner. And while this non-venomous snake might seem harmless, it could have easily eaten someone's dog or even a neighbor's baby. Number 4. Eastern Diamondback Rattlesnake. The Eastern Diamondback Rattlesnake is by far the biggest and meanest rattlesnake in the United States. Recently, a photograph appeared online showing an Eastern Diamondback Rattlesnake alleged to be 15 feet in length and captured in Florida. If this were true, it would make it the biggest of its kind ever found. However, the size of the serpent was dramatically exaggerated after it was caught. It's true that it came from St. Augustine, Florida, and it was definitely enormous, but it was probably closer to about 8 feet rather than 15. The largest an Eastern Diamondback Rattlesnake can grow is typically 8 feet, though they do average between 5 and 6 feet. Yet, even though the claim in this case was exaggerated, it was still a monstrous rattlesnake. These serpents have potent enough venom to kill a person or at least injure somebody's arm or leg. With enough venom, it might be cause for a person to get a limb amputated. They're extremely dangerous, and their huge size makes them all the more terrifying. Number 3. The largest snake orgy. The largest snake orgy in the entire world happens in Manitoba, Canada. Every year, mating season attracts hordes of frisky snakes, and it's a horrifying thing to behold. The location is known as the Nasir Snake Dens, and the snakes mating here are red-sided garter snakes. They're not dangerous or even very large, but their mating piles are grotesque in their size. The giant snake mating festival is so intense that up to 300 smaller males suffocate to death at the bottom of the pile every year. That's how much the snakes want to mate with each other. Watching the snakes mate is a huge tourist attraction, and you can often find snakes crawling across almost every surface in the area. They probably won't bite you though, as they're way too busy with the task at hand. The male snakes get so focused on reproduction that they don't eat throughout the entire season and often lose up to 20% of their own weight. In a single season, about 70,000 of these snakes will meet up here to breed. I wouldn't want to be in those snake dens when the massive mating call goes out to these animals. Number 2. The serpent's eggs. A huge snake was recently found by villagers in Nigeria. When they opened the snake up, they could not believe what they found. At first, the villagers had assumed that the behemoth of a snake had been devouring local cows. They had expected to cut open the reptile's belly and find a half-digested calf. What they found instead were hundreds of slimy balls. which turned out to be eggs, because the snake was pregnant. It looked fat not because it had eaten a cow or a horse, but because it was filled with these eggs. Naturally, the villagers went ahead and harvested said eggs. The snake looked to be over 20 feet in length, and so the yield was pretty impressive. Snake eggs are a delicacy in Nigeria, and the African rock python, which this snake likely was, is one of the favorite animals for locals to harvest eggs from. I would probably never eat a snake egg, though. Imagine eating an omelet of a half a dozen of those. It's totally weird and disturbing and not like a chicken egg at all. Number 1. The TITANOBOA. When it comes to the largest snake in existence, the TITANOBOA is the absolute biggest. It's not alive today, but millions of years ago in the jungles of South America, it was an absolute monster. The TITANOBOA thrived in what today is the Amazon jungle. Only the TITANOBOA lived 5 million years after the dinosaurs went extinct. It was at the top of the food chain, with a length of up to 50 feet, and it weighed up to 2,500 pounds. To put that in comparison, it was longer than a semi-truck, twice as heavy as a polar bear, and the TITANOBOA would have been about 3 feet wide at its thickest point. That's wider than a human torso. It's the kind of legendary snake that if it were found today, it would terrify just about everyone for miles around. According to scientific experts, the TITANOBOA acted just like a modern anaconda. It killed its prey by suffocating them, then it would swallow them whole. It spent its time inside of rivers waiting to ambush predators. And what's really cool is that the TITANOBOA wasn't even discovered until 2002, when its fossils were found in a huge coal mine in Colombia. The discovery was kind of half-accident, and since then it's really made people wonder just what other kinds of prehistoric monsters we haven't found evidence of yet. The TITANOBOA's skull hasn't even been found, only its vertebrae and skull fragments. But even with such little evidence, experts have been able to recreate a real-world model of what the TITANOBOA looked like. And yeah, it's the stuff of nightmares. This is one of the most bizarre and eccentric people to have ever lived, and his story is legendary. He kept making horrible business decisions that ended up working out for him in kind of strange ways. Timothy Dexter was born in the winter of 1748 to a family of farmers and struggled most of his life to make a name for himself. But Timothy was determined. He left home at an early age and lived in Boston, apprenticing at a leather dresser. Then Timothy tried to be a leather dresser himself. Didn't quite work out. And when Timothy met a woman named Elizabeth Frothingham, the couple married. She was quite wealthy. They moved into a rich neighborhood, where one of their neighbors was the famous John Hancock. Timothy wanted to be as rich as his neighbors, but they hated him and saw him as low-bred trash. They tried to swindle him out of his money by persuading Timothy to invest in a new trend, continental dollar bills. They thought that those would become worthless after the American Revolution failed, but it didn't fail. It succeeded, and the currency became quite valuable. Well, Timothy invested all of his money in this new type of currency, and it made him a stinking rich millionaire. The wealthy elites were not pleased with this at all, and Timothy just kept using his money to make huge investments and profit. His neighbors despised him, and the only friends he had only wanted him for his money. Later, he sent wool mittens there, but those also sold for a premium because other merchants bought them and took them to Siberia. He even sold coal to the port of Newcastle, where they mine coal. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but he had the good fortune to sell the coal during a coal miners' strike, and it made him even more money. And then there came the funeral. Timothy wanted to stage his own funeral to see what people truly thought of him. He convinced his wife and children to take part. Over 3,000 people came to his funeral, including Timothy. But after the funeral, Timothy was caught beating his wife with a cane because she hadn't cried enough and instead had laughed with the other guests. Timothy then passed away after his fake funeral at the age of 59. He was still very much disliked. But now he's legendary for his bizarre and wild investments and sales that all happen to work out and make him money. Number 9. Gilberto Araújo. Gilberto Araújo was working as a car washer in Brazil when his body was identified at the local morgue by his family. This happened in a small town about 70 miles from the border of Salvador. A car washer had been murdered on the weekend, and the police called Gilberto's family to see if they could identify the body. Well, they did identify the body, only it wasn't the right one. Police Inspector Roberto Lima later said that the mix-up was totally understandable, seeing as both men were around the same age, each worked as a car washer, and they looked strikingly similar. Still, they didn't know that the mistake had been made right away. Gilberto didn't even know that everyone thought he was dead until a friend of his found him in the street and told him that his family was heading off to his funeral. He had of course tried to phone his family, but they ignored the phone call because they thought it was a prank. The only thing Gilberto could do was turn up to his own funeral in person, which he did. Gilberto arrived at his funeral, and his unexpected appearance caused his friends and family to freak out. Some panicked and still others ran away. But in the end, everyone was happy to have Gilberto back to life. Number 8. The Cambodian Zombie. A group of people attending a funeral in Cambodia fled in fear after a man turned up at his own wake. They basically thought this guy was a zombie. The 32-year-old Cambodian man had been suffering from an unidentified mental illness and had been missing for 5 days before a decomposed body was spotted in a nearby river. Authorities mistook the bloated corpse for the missing man, and his family set up a funeral. As you can imagine, when he walked into his cremation, people were pretty surprised to see him. In fact, the people were so surprised that almost everyone in attendance ran away because they thought he was a ghost. According to a statement from his own father, after he realized that his son was in fact real and still alive and not a ghost, he had to convince the villagers to return to the funeral to see it for themselves. As for the random corpse that was about to be buried, it was handed over to the authorities. What would you do if you were at a funeral and the person who was supposed to be buried showed up? Would you freak out? I mean, I would. Tell me what you think by writing a comment down below. Then remember to subscribe to World List if you haven't already for more exciting videos. Number 7. Zheng Jia. A student in China recently decided to rehearse her own funeral for the reason that she didn't want to miss out on such a festive event. Zheng Jia forked over a ton of money to create one of the most elaborate funeral services ever. She had flowers, photographers, and a large crowd of people ready to mourn her. But the strangest part is that the student was only 22 years old, way too young to be thinking about holding a funeral. According to Zheng herself, the experience somehow gave her a more positive outlook on life. She spent a full hour lying completely motionless inside of her coffin, pretending to be a corpse. She had even paid a professional makeup artist to make her look like a dead body. A man in a military uniform stood over her corpse to guard her, and her friends and family all took part in the elaborate ceremony. Number 6. Captain Thunderbolt. Frederick Ward was a robber from the late 1800s known as Captain Thunderbolt. He was also known as a gentleman robber because he gave away a lot of the money that he stole to needy locals. He was basically Robin Hood, with women even hanging red sheets out of their windows to let Ward know when they saw the law was around. But unfortunately, the police shot and killed Ward in 1870. At least that's the official story. The legend is that Ward actually escaped his criminal past in England, made it to California, and then ultimately settled in Canada, where he lived a quiet life until 1903. According to the descendants of Frederick Ward, the police had set out to kill him, but had instead accidentally shot and killed Ward's uncle, then covered the mistake up by saying they had killed the infamous robber Captain Thunderbolt. The police even held a funeral for Frederick Ward in which a tall woman dressed in black with her face hidden by a veil attended. This tall woman was believed to be Ward himself mourning his uncle at his own funeral. Number 5. The Premature Funeral. An elderly couple from Bosnia recently decided that they were going to attend their own funerals. It wasn't part of a joke or a hoax. They just wanted to have the joy of attending their own death ceremony before they actually died. The ceremony was held in a small northern village where there were speeches made about how the couple first fell in love. And then there was a traditional burial feast followed by a night of celebration, music, and dancing. According to what the couple told local reporters, they were keen on organizing a proper funeral for themselves before they died because they had no children and didn't want anyone else to pay for their burial. Now the burial is all paid for and all they need to do is crawl into their graves. Number 4. Body ID Mishap. On the 1st of November, family members and friends of a man named Ademir Jorges Gonçalves in Brazil identified his body as the victim of a deadly car crash. The family was devastated. They scheduled the funeral to take place the next day, which happened to be on the holiday known as the Day of the Dead. But what the man's family didn't expect was for him to walk into the funeral home while they were grieving. You see, the man who was supposed to be dead had actually spent the night drinking at a bar near the site of the crash and wasn't involved in the accident. Instead, the crash had involved a man from one town over. After Ademir surprised everyone at his funeral, the body was handed over to the proper family. though not before the sight of the dead man caused some of his family members to literally jump out of the windows of the funeral home because they thought he'd risen from the dead. According to the manager of the funeral home, he'd never witnessed such a dramatic scene in his 10 years of business. Number 3. The bungled hit. When Noella Rakundo went from Australia to Burundi, there had been 3 hired killers waiting to take her out in a hit. They'd been paid by her husband as contract hitmen. She had returned to Burundi after attending her stepmother's funeral, and her husband back in Australia thought it would be a brilliant idea to get rid of her while she was out of the country. Unfortunately for her husband, the hitmen were not thrilled about killing a mother and innocent woman. Instead, they spared her life, extorted extra money out of her husband, and then gave Noella a memory card with the recording of her husband discussing the attempted murder. When Noella returned to Australia, her husband was already holding her funeral. He had assumed that she was dead and went ahead with the funeral without even seeing a body. She surprised him by showing up to her own funeral, and it turned out to be quite an ugly surprise for the husband, who was later convicted in a court in Melbourne. According to the BBC, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison for incitement to murder. Number 2. Zhang Diang. A villager living in the east of China decided he would hold a funeral for himself just to see how many people really cared about him. Zhang Diang was 66 years old, he had no children, he wasn't married, and all he wanted was to know how many people would show up to his funeral to give him one last goodbye. He organized the whole charade, and at least 40 of his relatives and several hundred local villagers arrived to mourn for him. He then surprised everyone who came to his funeral by jumping out of a fake tomb and holding a pretend ceremony in which he married a dead woman. It was all incredibly theatrical, and it ended up costing the old man over $2,000 to put on the fake funeral. In the end, it turned out he was actually quite liked, and everyone had a really good time. Number 1. A rude awakening. Walter Williams from Mississippi was pronounced dead at the age of 78. It was his second time. 2 weeks before being officially deceased, he was declared dead by the local county coroner, Dexter Howard. However, after the paperwork was all done and Walter was put inside of a body bag and transferred to a funeral home, the bag with Walter inside of it started to move. He was in the embalming room when his legs started kicking. He also started to breathe again. An ambulance was called and paramedics arrived to take Walter back to the hospital, where he was declared alive. Walter was even in such great shape that he was released from the hospital just a few days later, nearly escaping his own funeral. But unfortunately for Walter, he then died 2 weeks later, and this time for good. According to the exact same coroner who declared him dead the first time, it was due to natural causes. An American woman found herself in quite a pickle when her boat capsized during a wildlife tour in Zimbabwe. The woman was on a canoe safari with her husband and some other guests on the Zambezi River when one of the guides spotted a hippopotamus in the water near them. The guests were instructed to paddle away from the hippo, but it was too late. The hippo attacked the canoe, causing it to capsize and throwing the woman and her husband into the water. The hippo then viciously attacked the woman, dragging her underwater as she attempted to swim away. She punched the hippo several times in the face, trying to make the animal let her go. Nobody knows why the hippo was so angry that day, but the woman was lucky to escape. One of the guides was able to pull her onto the riverbank and administer first aid. According to ABC News, the American woman was airlifted to a local hospital, then to Johannesburg, where she made a full recovery after undergoing 2 surgeries to repair the immense damage done by the hippo's huge square teeth. Hippos are known to be extremely aggressive animals, killing at least 500 people a year. Wild Horizons, the safari company, said in a statement following the incident, "We would like to stress that while our guides are expertly trained and qualified to manage trips such as these, and that every preparation is painstakingly made, nature is unpredictable." Wow, boy is it. Number 9. Mauled at the Lodge. A game tracker working at the Maritaba Safari Lodge in South Africa was recently mauled and partially eaten by a pair of hungry lions. According to a police spokesperson, the tracking specialist had left his car and walked into the park when out of nowhere, 2 lions ambushed him. The irony here is that part of the game tracker's job was driving around the park and seeing where the animals were hanging out, so the tour guides could take curious tourists directly to the animals. He was supposed to be keeping an eye on the locations of the elephants and the lions, but in this case, it had been the lions who were keeping an eye on him. Unfortunately for those animals, both lions were later shot by rangers because it was feared they would attack again. Apparently, lion attacks are actually very common at game reserves and safari parks in South Africa, with a similar incident happening a year prior, in which a lodge owner was mauled to death by lions while taking a walk. Number 8. Attacked by a leopard. A British safari guide named Curtis Plum found himself in a dangerous situation when he got into a fight with a leopard. In this case, the human lost the battle. The leopard sank its teeth and claws into the British safari guide and mauled him nearly to death. Curtis had been driving tourists through the beautiful Kruger National Park in South Africa inside of an open-top 4x4 when the incident occurred. The leopard charged the vehicle and tried to jump in and attacked Curtis. The terrified tourists screamed and tried hitting the big cat off of him with their cameras and bags. A van passing by even tried to door-check the cat to get it off. Eventually, the feisty leopard let go. Curtis survived the attack but had serious injuries and was sent to the hospital in grave condition. But the story gets even more horrifying. Even after the leopard let go of Curtis, the danger wasn't over. The leopard then jumped on top of the vehicle and tried to attack the tourists. The driver slammed on the brakes and the leopard ended up falling off of the hood. And there was sadly no choice but to run the poor animal over. Sadly, the animal had to be put down. What would you have done if you had been in the same vehicle when the leopard attacked? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're at it, give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. Number 7. Billionaire versus Elephant. In 2009, a billionaire named Tom Seibel went on a walking safari in Tanzania. This safari was supposed to be safe and fun, but when Tom and his safari team arrived at a watering hole, an elephant decided it didn't like the look of this billionaire. I guess all that money didn't smell very good. The elephant attacked Tom, goring his thigh and actually shattering his leg. The elephant weighed at least 6 tons, and the force of the elephant's attack was so intense that the iPhone in Tom's pocket exploded into pieces. Even though Tom was brutally attacked by the elephant, he was lucky he survived, because not many people get attacked by the largest animal on the planet and live to tell the tale. He may have needed 16 surgeries afterwards just to save his leg, but at least he walked away with his life. Number 6. Gored by a rhino. In yet another horrifying South African safari attack, a local woman was gored by an angry rhino after thinking it was a good idea to pose near the animal for a photograph. If you've ever seen a rhino, you know these beasts are quite large and extremely ornery. Well, taking a selfie in front of one is a pretty brave thing to do. When Chantel Bayer and her husband did this, the ill-tempered rhino charged at her and stabbed her with its horn, resulting in serious injuries to her shoulder, ribs, and even to her lungs. Her husband got away unscathed, but the rhinoceros clearly didn't like getting its picture taken without its permission. And maybe Chantel will think twice the next time she wants to get up close and personal with African wildlife. She was last reported by the BBC as being in stable condition at the hospital, and she's probably gotten out now and is perfectly fine. Oh yeah, and Chantel did indeed get the original photo like she'd wanted. Number 5. Giraffe versus Jeep. Giraffes are cute and sweet, right? Well, apparently not all the time. A Jeep safari went horribly wrong when a perfectly peaceful giraffe had a mental breakdown and attacked a Jeep. The Jeep at the time was filled with tourists, who up until that point had been having a wonderful time. The 2.5-ton giraffe apparently really didn't like the Jeep being all up in its personal space, and so it attacked. The tourists screamed, the driver flipped out, and the giraffe continued to ram against the vehicle and kick at the driver, even knocking one of the mirrors off. But throughout the whole attack, one brave tourist recorded the whole thing on video, which they later uploaded online. At the end of the angry giraffe attack, nobody was injured, and the safari guests were able to laugh about it later when they got back to camp. Everything was fine. According to the park staffers, giraffes in the area are known for exhibiting odd behavior, but that was the first instance of one attacking a Jeep on tour. One specialist even said that there could be hormonal imbalances behind the unexpected attack. Either that or the giraffe could have just been having a really bad day. Number 4. Beijing tiger attack. In Beijing, a woman was recently mauled by a tiger while at an animal park. And as is customary after an attack at a zoo, the woman is now suing the park because she claims that she was never fully informed of the dangers and left her vehicle because she was carsick and didn't know any better. The incident was actually quite savage. After the woman left her car during the drive-through safari, tiger that she obviously didn't see before getting out of the vehicle came out of nowhere and attacked her. Then her mother, who was also with her, got out of the car thinking that she could fight the tiger off and save her daughter, who at this point had been dragged away by the large cat. Unfortunately, the mother ended up getting mauled to death by the angry beast while her daughter got away only partially injured. The still living victim is now seeking around $300,000 in compensation from the battling wildlife world, according to Beijing Times. And to make this story even more horrifying, during the attack, a nearby park official neglected to come to the rescue. When the story appeared online, most people actually sided with the park and not with the woman, saying that she should have known better than to get out of her vehicle with huge tigers nearby. And yeah, you'd think that would be some common sense. What do you think? Does this woman deserve any compensation for this? Number 3. Monkey mayhem. At a Scottish safari park, tourists were left stupefied after they were forced to watch an endangered monkey get eaten by a pride of lions. This happened at one of the most popular safari parks in the United Kingdom after a Barbary macaw escaped from its enclosure and then made the mistake of climbing into the lion's den. According to eyewitnesses, the screams of the monkey could be heard across the entire safari park as the big cats ripped into it with their teeth and claws, in full view of dozens of paying customers sitting in their vehicles. One of the workers at the park tried to shield the screaming monkey by parking their pickup truck over its ravaged body. But the lion simply snuck under the vehicle, pulled the monkey out with its paws, and then ran away with it. The body was not recovered until much later, but by that point it had pretty well been eaten. As for the rare monkey, it was one of 30 that were brought to the safari park from Gibraltar in 2014. They're an extremely rare species and definitely not meant to be snacks for hungry lions. A family that witnessed the horrible scene said, "We had hoped for a happy day out with our young child, but ended up having to explain to a toddler what had happened." Another person added, "The awful sound of the monkey screaming for its life will stay with us." A member for the charity Freedom for Animals, Sam Threadgill, said this heartbreaking and wholly avoidable incident is yet another example of why zoos and safari parks need to be phased out. So do you agree with Sam? Number 2. A deadly safari. A safari turned into a mother's worst nightmare when 11-year-old Garrett was eaten by wild hyenas. This happened in Botswana after a full day of safari fun in which mother and son had seen hippopotamuses, crocodiles, and even exotic birds. Everything was set for an exciting day on the morrow. And then in the middle of the night, a pack of hyenas broke into the young boy's tent, grabbed him by the neck, dragged him kicking and screaming into the bushes. The boy's shrieks woke up his mother, who had been sleeping in a tent nearby. Safari staff members were also woken and rushed to help, and the hyenas were chased away into the bushes. The safari guides eventually came upon Garrett, who was literally being devoured by hyenas. The engine of the Jeep managed to scare the dog-like beasts away, and they dropped the boy's body. Unfortunately, by the time the safari guides got the kid back to his mother, he was already dead. Number 1. The frisky elephant. Tourists on a safari in South Africa witnessed what can only be described as some extremely inappropriate behavior by an elephant. A bull elephant decided to get a little too frisky with a parked hatchback. The occupants of the VW Polo were horrified as the giant elephant began rubbing itself all over the roof and hood of their car, as if it wanted to get to know the vehicle a little better. The elephant was so large that it easily could have crushed the car and the people in it with just one step. The tourists were lucky that the bull elephant wasn't in an angry mood and was instead in more of a playful, amorous mood. Chances are the elephant was just itching itself, which they normally do using trees or rocks. It's just that the behavior looked a little strange to the people inside the car, who were basically having their vehicle felt up by a testosterone-filled elephant. By the time the elephant was finished rubbing against the vehicle, all 4 tires were blown out, the chassis was broken, and the couple inside were seriously shaken up. This is one creative solution that turned common sense on its head, but it might actually be a decent idea after all. When the Los Angeles Reservoir was facing a crisis due to a severe drought in 2015, officials decided to take a strange and unexpected action in order to save the water. The reservoir was evaporating at a startling rate, so the government purchased nearly 100 million black plastic balls and dumped them all into the water. That's right, they covered the surface of a massive reservoir with small plastic spheres. But what was the point? They wanted to reduce evaporation by putting a barrier between the surface of the water and the hot, dry air. Additionally, these balls prevent algae from growing by keeping sunlight from hitting the water. But was it really a good idea? The balls take a lot of energy to produce, and they would need to save a significant quantity of water to be worth their expense. Luckily, over 5 years sitting in the hot sun and covering the reservoir, it seems like they have actually been worth their cost. They've kept huge quantities of water safe and snug under their protective layer. Projects like this one may become normal in the American Southwest in the future if droughts continue. You might have to get ready to see your own ball-covered lake in your city in years to come. Number 10. The Pants Life Jacket. A German backpacker named Arne was recently sailing with his brother Helge when they fell overboard on his yacht and into the sea. This guy ended up getting set adrift all by himself in the violent waters, and the only way he was able to stay alive was with a dumb idea that actually worked. Apparently, the German tourist had learned the survival tactic that saved his life only because he heard that Navy SEALs do the same thing. Once out at sea, the German took his jeans off, made a knot at the end of each leg, and then inflated them and pushed them underwater, creating a makeshift life vest. If making a life jacket out of your jeans seems like kind of a stupid idea, it's because it kinda is. But in this case, it was an idea that ended up working out quite well, and it saved his life. The guy was adrift for a total of 3 hours, which doesn't seem like too long, but when you start to think about how scary the ocean is, it probably felt like forever for Arne. He just hung on to his substitute life vest until a helicopter finally found him floating through the water and was able to throw down a rope so he could climb to safety. Everyone thought for sure he was dead, but his dumb idea of making a life preserver out of his jeans, it ended up saving his life, and he was able to see his family and young daughter once again. Number 9. The Pet Rock. When it comes to dumb ideas, there's been nothing dumber in the history of humanity than the Pet Rock. The Pet Rock was the brainchild of a marketing specialist named Gary Dahl, who had originally gotten the idea while sitting in a bar listening to his friend complain about his kid's pet. Gary suggested to his friend that they give their child a pet rock instead of a dog. This dumb idea was just a joke, but it turned out to make Gary a very rich man. He marketed his pet rock as the perfect household companion, especially for young children. The pet rock didn't need to be fed, it didn't bark, it didn't require any cleaning up, and even more ridiculous, Gary included a set of instructions detailing how to properly care for a pet rock. It even included a cardboard box that looked like a pet carrier. This wildly dumb idea had Gary selling the pet rock for $3.95, and according to Business Insider, he was making a profit of $3 each. Within the first 6 months that the pet rock was for sale, Gary moved over 5 million units. This turned into one of the greatest fads in world history. It was just a stupid idea that made an ordinary guy a filthy rich millionaire. Makes you wonder how many of your dumb ideas might actually turn into something trendy. Number 8. Coffee pot hot dogs. Here's a dumb idea that actually works. Cook your hot dogs in your coffee maker. If you have a coffee machine, you actually have an entire cooking module at your disposal. Some genius came up with the brilliant idea of cooking hot dogs inside of a coffee maker's carafe, using the simplicity of the coffee machine to forego having to make dirty dishes on the stove. And while this seems completely dumb, it actually cooks the hot dogs pretty well. It doesn't take up a lot of time and it requires absolutely no energy. Your coffee might have a little hot dog taste, but for some that's a bonus. But wait, because even more amazing gourmet meals can be made right inside your coffee pot. You can make noodle soup, you can create chocolate fondue, and believe it or not, you can even bake a cake simply by using the heating element at the bottom of your coffee pot. With a little ingenuity, you can turn a coffee pot into a fully functioning stove and oven. So what's the first thing you're going to try to make in your coffee pot? Let me know in the comments below. Give this video a like, and why don't you hit that subscribe button while you're at it too. Number 7. Face Mask Mayhem. People have been getting pretty creative with their face masks. In the age of COVID-19, no idea is too dumb. And rather than complain about wearing a mask, some undercover geniuses have been making incredibly crafty, dumb face masks that actually work. In Gaza, a mother was photographed making masks for her children out of pieces of cabbage. And while this may seem silly, it still works. And then there are these crazy photos coming out of Indonesia, in which a street parking worker was spotted wearing a used water jug over his head to keep the germs away. And you might think it looks ridiculous to have a water jug on your head, but if the water can't get out, I'm pretty sure the germs can't get in, right? I mean, I'm no doctor, but Speaking of water jugs, children all over the world have been seen using pop bottles as makeshift face masks, simply by stuffing their faces inside of them. Adults have been seen doing this too. by cutting 2-liter bottles in half and strapping them to their faces. And of course, if you're feeling exceptionally lazy, you can be like the people spotted in China, literally just putting plastic bags over their heads for protection. It seems dumb, but I guess it does the trick. Although that last one could potentially be pretty dangerous, but hey, no coronavirus. Number 6. Talking pictures. When the radio was invented in the 1920s, there was a corresponding drop in the attendance of movie theaters. However, the guys at the top of the ladder in the film industry were not interested in adding voices to movies to try and get more customers. In the words of 1924 film director D.W. Griffith, "We do not want now, and we shall never want the human voice in our films." Movies with human voices were voted as a bad idea, with an actress at the time named Ethel Barrymore even agreeing that the theater-going public would never put up with a talking picture, known back in the day as a talkie. Of course, this was a bad idea that really ended up paying off eventually. Of course, people wanted to listen to voices in the movies. The first feature-length talking film was called The Jazz Singer, and it opened in October of 1927. Much to everyone's disbelief, it was a huge success. Studios then rushed to produce films with talking, singing, screaming, all the loud noises in them, although many people still claimed that it was just a fad and that it would go away. And if that was the case, well then the fad of talking pictures is still going strong even today. Number 5. Square watermelon. It seems like trying to purposely grow square watermelons would be a pretty dumb idea. After all, watermelons are traditionally round and delicious. And yet in Japan, farmers were having a bit of a hard time with round watermelons being too awkward and taking up way too much space in their small refrigerators. Somebody got the strange idea to grow watermelons inside of glass boxes so that they would grow into a cube shape. This seemed ridiculous, but it actually caught on. The watermelons were grown as squares. They were able to be packaged and shipped normally, and nobody had to deal with the annoyingness of the circle. Even today, the dumb idea of the square watermelon is still making people a lot of money. A Japanese square watermelon can sell for up to $82. But don't worry, if you're not interested in paying $82 for a square watermelon, you can just grow one yourself in your garden. All you need are some watermelon seeds and a glass box. Number 4. Long arm savior. A few years ago, there was a very strange story about a Mongolian herdsman named Bo Shi-shun, who was called in to save a pair of dolphins. They had swallowed plastic at their aquarium in the northeast of China and were in desperate trouble. Obviously, calling a random herdsman to save some dolphins seems like a pretty dumb idea. But in this case, the herdsman was actually the world's tallest man, standing at 7 foot 9 inches. This guy used his incredibly long arms to reach deep inside the stomachs of the dolphins and pulled out the plastic shards that had been causing them such misery. In the end, the guy with his incredibly long arms saved the lives of the dolphins and became something of a hero, although he was already famous and in the Guinness Book of World Records for his height. The only thing that's not clear is why the tall man was called instead of a veterinarian. I mean, it seems like a veterinarian with proper tools would be a better choice, but everything did work out in the end. This guy was basically the herdsman version of Ant-Man, and it's nice of him to use his powers for good. Number 3. The Giant Mirror. A town shrouded in darkness in Norway used to live in shadows for half of the year. But the people living in the little town weren't happy with their dark lives. When there's no sun, people get gloomy and upset, and it was time for the small town of Rjukan to get some sunshine back in their lives. But how do you force the sun to come out? The answer for this small Norwegian town was a giant mirror. The idea was first talked about in 1913, and it was even published in a local newspaper. However, instead of building a giant mirror to harness sunlight, a cable car was built in 1928 so that people could reach the top of the nearby valley and soak in some much-needed sunlight. This proved to not be the best idea. In this case, it was a good idea that actually didn't work. It wouldn't be until recently, a few years ago, that the mirror was finally installed. What first seemed like a dumb idea turned out to be an awesome idea, as 3 solar-paneled mirrors are now stationed at the valley peak above the town, controlled by computers to track the sun as it moves across the sky and redirect its rays into Rjukan. With all that extra sunlight, the residents of the small town are feeling much less gloomy. Number 2. Bottled air. 2 guys from Canada recently sold about $300,000 worth of canned air. That's right, these guys have gotten rich by canning air and then selling it for a ridiculous price. Apparently, the company first started when a couple of entrepreneurs sold a Ziploc bag of air for $168 online as what had probably been just a joke. This definitely seems like the dumbest business decision ever, except that it's actually working. Clean Canadian air is being purchased heavily from retail stores and online, primarily in South Korea. And according to CBC News, there's actually quite a bit of competition. There are air companies starting up all over the world, transporting their air to other places where people might want to try it. A single can holds enough air inside for 160 breaths and is currently sold for $32. Now that's some serious profit. Number 1. The Zombie Captain. One of the dumbest and yet most brilliant ideas in military history involved Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, a national Spanish hero and mercenary soldier who fought under the Spanish king Alfonso VII, helping to liberate many parts of Spain and ultimately capturing the Muslim Caliphate of Valencia before dying in 1099, when the city became besieged 5 years after its conquering by the Almoravids. While there's no direct evidence that this happened, legend says that after Rodrigo died in the middle of the siege of Valencia, his corpse was ordered to be placed onto his horse to boost the morale of his troops. His body was apparently fitted with armor and then sent thundering into battle so that the attackers of Valencia could see that the fearless warrior was still alive. This incredibly dumb idea ended up working and the day was saved, though Rodrigo did stay dead. The Spaniards won the battle, yet Valencia did eventually fall to the invading army and was not recaptured again for another 125 years. Thanks for watching. What was the dumbest idea you ever had that actually worked? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and come back soon for another awesome video.